Welcome back to another episode of the Confident Kingdom Woman podcast. I'm Barbara.
And I'm Laura, and this is the podcast where faith meets personal development.
And we help you bridge the gap between who you are and who you know you're called to be.
And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about purpose, which I found out is one of Barbara's favorite topics. And so, Barbara, give us just a little bit of background and context. Like, what about this topic makes you so excited?
Well, I think it's just my journey. You know, as we're talking about purpose today, a lot of times our purpose is tied into our journey. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, in my life, I could just see how God just unfolded my purpose, like step by step by step by step. And I know a lot of people have a hard time nailing down like really what their purpose is and why they're here. And I feel like that's an area where God has kind of gifted and graced me in my own personal life, but also to help others to discover that. And what I found is just with spiritual things in general, I think sometimes we overcomplicate things. We make things so difficult when I feel like a lot of times God has placed the answer to those questions, like, what is my purpose? Why am I here? Right in front of us. We just have to know what to look for.
That's so good. And I think you're 100% right. I think the word purpose makes people nervous and sometimes uncomfortable because it sounds very lofty and like very big and kind of out of scope. But the way that you just described it, you're just like, okay, God's not trying to complicate your purpose.
Nope, not at all.
Like he's wanting to be very intentional. And so we're going to spend some time just discussing what is it about our purpose that's important, and how, you know, we cannot separate our identity from our purpose.
Man.
I think sometimes we try to do that, you know?
Do. Yeah, that's so important. And I think that's one of the lessons that the Lord has taught me is about how my identity ties into my purpose. Mm-hmm. You know, before we started, we were just looking at some verses in Psalm 139 and also in Isaiah 1:5, where God talks about how he told the prophet, before I even formed you, I already called you.
Oh, Jeremiah. Mm-hmm.
Jeremiah. What did I say?
Isaiah.
Oh, Jeremiah. Okay. Before I even formed you, I already had a purpose in mind for you. Mm-hmm. And so if we can understand how God formed us, if we can understand our identity, then that makes our purpose very clear. Mm-hmm. You know, like, for instance, you know, these chairs that we're sitting in, they were created in a certain way, right? Mm-hmm. They have certain features. They have certain characteristics because of what they're going to be used for. And so I think if we can understand different things about how God created us, it will kind of lead and direct us to our purpose.
That's so good. You reminded me of, there's a scripture and a story in the Bible. I cannot remember what prophet it was, but God told him to go look at the clay maker and watch how he forms the clay. And it reminded me, so many times you hear people say, like, why are you going to anyone or anything else that did not create you for the answer to why you were created? It's kind of like if you have a potter, right? And they're making something and you are trying to tell them what it is that they should make. And they're just like, no, I already have the idea in my mind of like what this is going to be, what it's going to be used for. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, like in the scripture, God knew us before we were formed. So he didn't wait to give you all the attributes and then figure out, oh, this is what I want you to be. He knew ahead of time and made every part of you so intentional. And I think sometimes it's hard to just even grasp that concept.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think it's also important to understand our identity because you prevent yourself from falling into that comparison trap and trying to fit into a mold that God never created you to fit into.
Yeah.
You know, it's so easy for us to look at someone else's purpose, you know, how God is using someone else, what God is doing in someone else's life. But if we understand where we are and who we are, I think we can prevent ourselves from looking at what God is doing in other people's lives and be grateful and appreciative of, you know, how he created us, what he's given us, and how he wants to use us.
That goes back to, I think it was either in episode 1 or episode 2, where we talked about identity. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, if we spend all of our time looking outside, like as you were talking, I was thinking about how much we take in social media and even just TV, even just walking outside of, you know, your home and looking at other people's lives. You take in so much of what other people have and what other people do, but then you don't spend enough time going into the Word and being like, okay, what is it that God wants me to have? What is it that God wants me to do? Mm-hmm. And so you have to be very vigilant, I feel, and very disciplined to avoid the comparison trap. Because if not, I think it's 100% the enemy's goal to sit there and have you constantly comparing yourself, which most people are caught in that trap. I feel like it's very hard to not do that when there's so much media and things that are just readily available and ready to like grab your attention.
Yeah, and then you can be, once you know those things about yourself, you can be like settled in who you are without trying to change things about yourself or, be like someone else. So I know that set me free. Like for instance, I'm a very detail oriented person, right? I want to know all the details. Don't give me if you're going to tell me a story, I need to know everything. And many times I'll stop you mid sentence and be like, so, well, what about this? Or what about that? Right. And so I understand that about myself, but I understand that God created me that way because I'm a teacher. And so I have to be a detailed thinker because God created me to break down complex things to make them simple for other people to understand. And so that's just an example of certain things that, you have to know about yourself and know why God created you and gave you the certain, characteristics or the certain, bend that he gave you. There's a purpose for it.
There's such a purpose for it. And I love that you mentioned that because I think many people, even myself, have spent so much time questioning attributes like that and then wanting to change those attributes in order to fit the mold of somebody else, in order to gain somebody else's approval. And it's like, it never works.
Right.
It never works whenever you try to change those characteristics because they're just so innate. It becomes so natural. It's a part of you. And you end up miserable. You really do.
Absolutely miserable because you don't understand those things about yourself. And so really, I want to encourage you to take some time and really think about, what are the qualities and characteristics that you possess that stand out, and then pray about and ask God, Lord, like, what part of my purpose does this serve? Like, why am I this way? Why do I act this way? Why do I think this way? Why do I process things this way? And then I think a lot of our purpose will be uncovered as we begin to discover those things about ourselves.
Okay, you mentioned something really, really good, and I want to just dive into it a little bit more. You mentioned, when it comes to your purpose, identifying those characteristics that you have, and then going back to God and asking him, what part of my purpose does this serve? And I don't think a lot of us look at it in that way because we think purpose means one thing and one thing only, and that's it. And we are so multifaceted that I think it's such a disservice to try to pigeonhole all the parts of you into one area or one way. So I'd love for you to just dive in, help me understand that a little bit more. Because I'm okay, parts of you can play into different parts of your purpose. How do we help people realize that there's so much more to you because we were created by such an amazing and such a big God?
Right.
And it's kind of like how in the Bible, you go through scripture and you find and you read that there's different characteristics about God, right? He's loving, he's merciful, he's kind, he's just. And it's just okay, there's more parts to me than just what I know about myself. And so let's dive into that a little bit. I know that's $1 million question, but
It is. While you were saying that, what came to my mind were spiritual gifts. God has given us all different types of spiritual gifts, right? Yeah. Now, the Bible tells us that we all have at least one. But I'm pretty sure that we all have more than one, right? And so I think understanding, those spiritual gifts and how they work together, okay? Because, and I can only speak, for myself, I understand that although my primary gift is teaching, my secondary gift is administration, okay? So that plays out differently if my primary gift were teaching and my secondary gift were pastor.
Okay.
It looks different. How my mix of gifts determines how my purpose is expressed.
That's good.
So I remember when I used to work on staff at a church, whenever I would teach the Bible study or preach the Sunday morning, a lot of people after church would be like, you would make such a great pastor. And I'm like, actually, I wouldn't, because I don't want to say I'm not caring, but I'm not a people person. Like I don't have a lot.
Yeah.
I don't have a grace to deal with people on that level.
Yeah.
What I do have a grace for is structuring and organizing information.
There you go. Yep.
So that looks different if, I had a secondary gift of pastoring, or if my primary gift were teaching and I felt called to kids. It looks
Yeah.
different. So
Yeah.
you have to understand the gifts that you have and how they work together. And like you said, I could have easily said, "Oh, I'm a great teacher. Let me go pastor a church." Because in my head, and I let people get put that in my head that
Yeah.
teacher equates to pastor, when teacher does not necessarily equate to pastor. And so again, we have to be careful not to pigeonhole ourselves into one thing just because
Yeah.
we have one particular attribute. So that's how I would answer that question.
I love that answer. I think literally that it makes everyone pause and say,
Right.
okay, what are my characteristics and what are my gifts? Because it's very individual.
It's so individual.
I cannot sit here and say, oh, well, Barbara and I are both detail oriented, so that means we should follow the same path. No,
Right.
it wouldn't work because there are specifics to me and specifics to you that lead to completely different areas. And maybe similar in ways, but it's going to be very unique to you. And so I love that explanation because it just makes everyone say, oh, okay, it's okay that I'm not like this person or I'm not exactly like that person. Like God was very intentional in making us that way.
And he made you that way because you're the only person who can fulfill that in the earth. And that is the thing that we have to understand.
Yeah.
That there is something missing when we don't function in the purpose and the assignment. I'm convicting myself.
Yes.
That God created us to function in. And I think that is what we have to get. And I think I shared this on one of the previous episodes, is that, God had to show me, listen, what you have is not for you.
Yep.
What you have is for somebody else.
Yep.
So we have to get intentional, y'all, about discovering what God, and I don't want people to feel pressure, because there is balance.
Yeah,
You know what I
of
mean?
course.
There is balance in this. And like I said, this is just an area where, where I feel like God has graced me in to understand my purpose and help other people do that as well. So
Yeah.
I don't want to put pressure because people can get so frustrated. Like, oh my
Yeah.
God, oh my God. I was listening to, I'm going to ask you a question in a minute.
Okay.
I was listening to a lady teaching, and she had me cracking up because she was like, people are always asking, what their purpose is. And she's like, well, when did you fast? Like, when did you pray? Like, when did you really actually seek the Lord?
Yep.
Instead of always crying about, I don't know my purpose. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, what have you done for God to reveal this to you except just say, oh, I don't know my purpose. I don't know my purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for anyone who's struggling, like, to identify what their purpose is, what advice would you give them? Like, what are some steps they can take to begin to discover that?
Yeah. I think the first step is everything you just mentioned. Like, you need to pause and you need to go to God. Because again, no one else can give you the answer to what is your purpose other than the one that made you, the one that created you. And so I would pause and just say, okay, let me take some time. Whatever time the Holy Spirit puts on your heart to fast, to pray, to step away, and to just like clear your mind. Because I think, again, it's so easy to get distracted by all of the things. Start this business, go here, look at this. Like, it's just nonstop. And so you've got to just pause and get into a quiet place and just say, okay, Lord, it's me and you. What am I here on this earth to do? And let him start to reveal that to you. Now, I'm not going to say that he's just going to lightning's going to strike and there's going to be all this thunder and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what it is. It may not, right? He's going to start slowly revealing to you what it is that he's called you to do. And he's going to reveal it in a way that, how do I say this? It's bigger than you, but he's going to meet you where you're at. I think that's the best way to kind of start it there.
That's really good.
Because I think a lot of times, like, we think, oh, I'm going to have these, really great moments like the prophets in the Bible. And it's like, yeah, sure. But guess what? They also lived lives. Like, they still had, a day after a day after a day. Like, we see those moments and those highlights, but they still lived full life. So you're still going to live your life. But God's going to meet you where you're at. And I think another thing that I would add on top of that, you said it earlier, is what are you graced to do? What are those things that come easy to you? What are those things that you, I'm not going to say always enjoy doing, because I think a lot of the times the purposes that God has for our lives, they're not going to be something that you're going to be like, yes, I love doing this 100%. Oftentimes you're going to be like, I'm good at this, but I'd rather not.
Exactly.
I think that's the balance, is understanding that when you get that answer from God, you are going to have to deal with your own soul and realize, okay, this is what God says. I have to meet him where he's met me, and baby step by step, I will get there. But don't ever think that what you have been called to do or what your purpose is going to just feel like you on a mountaintop 24/7.
It's absolutely not. Because even though you're graced for it, and even though God has called you to it, there's still challenges.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You still have to get over yours, like you said, your soul. You still have to get over your flesh. And
Yeah.
I think so many of us, we delay walking in our purpose because we don't feel something.
Yep.
We don't feel prepared. We don't feel like we're ready.
Yep.
So we sit and we don't step out into the things that God has called us to do. And so
Exactly.
I'm here to tell you, you ain't gonna ever feel ready. And then here goes the thing. The moment you start to feel ready, then God's gonna call you to something else.
Every time.
Every single time.
Every
So
time.
get over yourself.
It's real.
It is.
And I know, like, we both deal with these exact same things that we're sitting here and talking about. And to your point, it never fully goes away. As God continues to walk with you in this life, as he continues to open doors and gives you ideas and things to do, or, you know, people come to you and you're like, great, I think this is an awesome opportunity. That feeling of I'm not prepared normally is not going to go away. You're going to get used to it, right? Like when you start walking in your purpose, it's like, oh, okay, like I can kind of do this. And then God's going to call you to something else. And you're going to go through this same cycle of like, oh my gosh, what's happening? Am I really called to do this? Can I really do this? And I think of, you know, so many greats in the Bible, like Moses, like Jeremiah, like just so many that Gideon. I was just reading about Gideon yesterday. Hey, mighty man, great, let's go do this. And he's just like, what are you talking about? But in that moment, I'm like, God didn't call him based on where he was right there. He called him based on the purpose that he knew he had for him all along. We are the ones that have to catch up to God.
That's absolutely right. And what we'll find is when we start to do that, that's when the grace will come.
Yep. Every time.
Now it's gonna lift when the assignment is over. You're gonna be back.
Yep.
You're gonna be back to normal.
Yes.
But when you're operating and functioning where God has called you, there's
Yeah.
gonna be a grace on you. That's gonna make it easy for you to function and to flow in whatever that grace is.
Exactly. Exactly.
Can we talk about assignments for a second?
Oh, I know we already said purpose. She said assignments. Whew. Let's
Because
do
I
it.
think we have to understand the relationship between our purpose and our assignment, y'all.
Oh, for sure.
Because the purpose is, and this is just a loose definition, but it is the what. But the assignment is the how
Yes.
for that particular season. Uh-oh.
Oh, she said season. I am so sorry, y'all. She's just knocking everyone down. Okay. Yes.
But we have to understand that even though the purpose generally is going to be the same,
Yeah.
the assignment or the how it may change from one season to the next season.
Yep.
You know, in one season, it may be, I don't know, what's an example?
I mean, I think one of the easiest things to think about it is through just like jobs, right?
That's a good one. Let's go with that.
So you are working. Let's say you graduated from high school, you graduated from college, and you are praying like, Lord, I need a job. Great. Lord opens a door. You get a job. It's what you wanted. You're just like, yes, this is amazing. Let's do it. And let's say you're on the job for a few years. You have the grace for it. And then all of a sudden things start to feel a little sticky and you're just like, I actually don't enjoy this that much. Whether it be, your boss, whether it be, the company, the work that you're doing, like things just don't feel as easy as they did, right? And so a lot of times it's just like, oh, I can blame it on everybody else. I can blame it on my boss. I can blame it on my friends. I can blame it on like, oh, they're not promoting me. Well, maybe the grace is lifted and God wants you to kind of move on to something else. And a lot of times in that example, people get stuck because we're like, oh no, like, you want me to find a different job? You want me to do something else? I need new skills. Like, God, what is happening? Or, God, you opened the door for this job. What's going on? And so in that moment, right, you have to seek the Lord and say, okay, what's next? And watch what he does, whether that's an open door in that job, right, for a new role. Is that an open door outside? Like, I think that's an easy moment to see when the grace lifts somewhere. You got to go to God and say, okay, what's next? And then you have to be willing to walk into that what's next.
That's the scary part, at least for me.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm one of those people. I like everything the same. I don't like change. That's why Laura has a little joke about her hair. Like her hair has been different in all the episodes. Mine been the same. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay. Yes. But sometimes we have to know when it's time to let go. You know, when our assignment, in a particular season is over.
But I think going back to that, what was the assignment and the job that God had for you? And then did you fulfill that assignment?
Right.
And then when you move into the next, what's that assignment? Because I think it's easy naturally to get caught up in it's just a job, it's just a company, it's just a degree, it's just whatever. And it's like, okay, pull the curtain back a little bit and see what is the assignment? Like, why does God have you there? I think that's an area that we don't spend enough time thinking about, but just throwing that in there.
And not only why does God have you there for the establishment, but what is it doing in you?
Yeah.
And what is it preparing you for? And what is God trying to do, in your own heart? So
yeah, for sure.
Ooh.
But
this is convicting.
Oh, 100%. I'm sitting here just like, I hear you, Lord. Okay, great. But you mentioned, okay, purpose is the what. The assignments are the how. So I guess the question that I have for you, and really, for those who are listening, it's like, okay, but how do I know if I'm in a right assignment? Like, how do I know if I entered something because of me, or did I actually enter something because God opened that door and I'm here to fulfill that assignment?
I think one of the ways is, what is it producing? What is the fruit that's being produced from that thing? Because even though, it may not be the ideal situation, there's going to be fruit somewhere, whether people are telling you something, that you're being a blessing to them, or there's going to be some type of fruit there when you're in the right place, even though your soul might be bucking against it a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think you mentioned it too. It's like, it's going, a lot of times what I've realized is in those moments or those seasons where I'm just like, I'm uncomfortable either in this role or in this place. To your point, I'm reminded of the small conversations, those random conversations where I got a text yesterday of someone that's like, I just love the calm that you bring. I love the word that you bring. I love how you're just always blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, okay, God, let me acknowledge that. Maybe I'm here for the people. I'm actually not here for the work.
That's good.
That's hard.
It is. Because now you have to get outside of yourself.
Yep. Which goes back to purpose to begin with. There's something that God has for you to do, to bring, and to be, and it's not for you. You mentioned it earlier, and I immediately thought, so I don't know how much I've shared, but I'm in my gardening era right now.
I'm trying to get into that. I want to start doing that.
I can help you. I got you.
Okay.
For sure. And you have plenty of space.
I do. That was my concern. Like, where am I going to put something?
I have 4 tomato plants right now. You have plenty of space. But I thought about it when it comes to gardening and planting things. Like, for example, a tomato plant. The fruit that is produced for the tomato plant is not for the tomato plant. The fruit that's produced in any type of plants, more often than not, it's not for the actual plant. It's for something else. It's for somebody else. And so it's just like the fruit that you produce in your life, whether that be in what you do and what you share, it's normally 99.999% not for you. And so it's the getting over yourself, I think, that has the biggest impact when it comes to purpose. Because everyone's like, oh, what's my purpose? But we're looking at it through like, God, what is it that you want me to do for me?
Right.
Not what is it that you want me to do for others. That's the key.
That's powerful, man. That's very powerful. Let's talk about something. Let's talk about frustration.
I was not ready.
Okay, so you had mentioned before we started about Joseph and how he had a vision, but then it seemed like his life started going in a different direction than what God showed him. So, like, when we find ourselves, we feel like Joseph was, we feel like we're in that pit, or we feel like, we're slaving, or we feel like, we're in that prison. But I know what God told me. I know what God showed me. And you begin to feel that frustration, like, I don't know, can you help us with that? Like, what do we do in that situation?
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to do is one, realize that frustration is a normal part of the human life. Like, I think sometimes we can get so caught up in trying to live this life and act like we're never going to have problems and that things are always going to go our way and that we're never going to buck up against things. And I'm like, okay, well, one, you have an enemy. So, like, let's just pause there. It's going to happen. But two, it goes back to identity. And it goes back to, do you truly believe what God said? Because if that is your foundation, then you've got to settle your soul and just realize, you know what, Lord, I don't understand what's happening, but I trust you anyway. So yeah, you've got to know who you are and who God created you to be. Because I think when you actually lean into those purposeful characteristics that God has placed on the inside of you, those are also meant to help you get through the frustration. They're meant to help you get through those thorny seasons or those dry seasons. And I think a lot of the times we try to look outside of ourselves for help and support through those seasons. And it's just like, whoa, pause. The seasons are meant for something. Mm-hmm. And we know that regardless of the season, God turns everything for our good. And so what are you learning about yourself during the season? What may God be revealing about you to yourself during those seasons? And then ultimately, regardless of how we feel, and I know it's super, super hard, but those seasons don't last forever. And I think Joseph is the perfect example of like, hey, you had these dreams and you were like, okay, God, you're going to make me great. Sharing it with people, they're not really understanding it, fine. Then you get sold into slavery. Well, one, no, you get threatened. You get threatened, your life is like, we're going to kill you. And then it's like, oh, wait, no, God came through. I'm only being sold. Cool. Fair. I'm still alive, right? And then he's probably thinking like, God, this is not greatness. This is not stars and moon. No, this is none of that. But he continued to serve with excellence. Like, he didn't let any of those situations change who he was. And I think that's the issue, is that we often either change ourselves to try to fit or like push ourselves through a situation, or we let circumstances change us.
Absolutely.
And that's what gets us caught and trapped, because he didn't change that. He was excellent in Potiphar's house. He was excellent in the jail. He was excellent when he served Pharaoh. That never changed. From pit to palace, his identity and his characteristics and how he showed up. I think we talked about that in episode 3 and 4, like how he showed up and represented himself. That never changed.
Yeah, that's so good. So one thing that you reminded me of was that they had threatened his life. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time I preached a message. I think it was called Trial by Fire. But what I said was that because of that purpose on his life, he couldn't be destroyed.
Yeah.
Because of what he was carrying. And so for some of us, you know, I just want to encourage people that when you are going through that and you feel like you're in that pit, or you feel like, you know, you're in that prison or whatever, because of what you're carrying, that assignment of the enemy to destroy you, it's not going to work. It's only going to, it may be a season, maybe a rough season, but it will not destroy you because of the purpose that you carry.
That is so good.
And I just want to encourage people too, like, sometimes we know our purpose, but we act like we forgot. Or we act like God changed his mind.
Stop, Barbara. Yes, no, for sure. For sure.
And so sometimes you have to go back and remind yourself about what God told you about yourself, what God showed you about yourself. Yeah. Because you'll forget. You'll forget who you are. You know, and I think that was the thing about Joseph. I don't know what he did. I don't know how he reminded himself, but he never lost sight of that.
Never.
Even though his situation changed, even though his surroundings changed, he never forgot about what God planned in him when he was a teenager.
And can we just talk about that for a second? Because when we talk about surroundings changed, it's not that he moved from one house to another or he went to a new school. You're talking about culture shocks, completely different cultures, completely different language, completely different way of lives. And he still stood strong. Like that right there, I think, especially, I know I was telling you earlier, like sometimes depending on like the country that you live in, you can get so caught up in thinking and living your life in the way that, you know, the culture around you does. And when you step outside of that culture and experience a different culture, you are then exposed to, oh snap, there's like different ways of living and different ways of thought. And what I grew up always knowing, other people don't, right? It's a little different. But even in that moment, right, he went from his home to Egypt, which complete 180. he still didn't lose sight of who he was.
Nope.
Even in working in that culture, serving other people in that culture, he still didn't lose sight of that.
I think the same thing with Daniel.
Yeah.
Yep, same thing.
Exactly. So how do we do that in this day and age, right? The Bible says to not be conformed to this world. How do we not conform? And we're talking in all aspects. Like, you still have to live here. You still got to work on this earth. Like, but how do you remind yourself of who God told you you were and keep that in the forefront instead of getting caught up in the situations that are going to come? Because they're going to come. Life is going to happen. We can't escape that. But it's all about how we work through it.
Absolutely. So we've talked about purpose, right? And I know because you and I are both entrepreneurial, we see things from that lens.
Right.
Right. And we understand that our purpose for us is probably to the masses. Why we're here.
Right.
But what would you say to someone who doesn't feel called to be like out front? You know, because a lot of people, they can't resonate with, God didn't tell me to start a ministry. God didn't tell me to start a business. So, like, how can we encourage, people to be comfortable in whatever that purpose is?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And my mind is going in a few different areas right now. I think the first thing I would say to someone is that is okay. Like, it is an okay thing, especially in a world where everyone expects you to put everything out front and center and everything should be on social media or online. Like, it doesn't. And that's fine. And if God has not called you to that, then be okay with that.
Right.
There's plenty of people that wish that they weren't called to the masses. But I would say be okay with that. And then 2, I would say become very aware of who God has called you to. So the first group of people that I'm thinking about right now are moms. And I think it's so easy. Like, Mother's Day was just a few weeks back. And it's so easy for mothers to get caught up in doing all of these things for everybody else and not actually seeing and understanding the fruit and the importance of being a mom, right? Of being a mother. And that to me is just like, it's sad because the impact and the legacy that a mother makes goes far beyond really anything that people can really think of or imagine. And you're not always going to see the fruit of it. And I think that's probably the biggest thing for those of you who are like, okay, well, I wasn't called to be online, be on social media, start business, do all these things. Like, I'm just called to my little community around me. The impact that you have on that little community goes beyond what you can see and think. And it's going to go beyond you even in this life. And I think that's the hard part, is because we want instant gratification. And we're like, I told them that and they did it and boom, like their life is amazing. And it's like, no. It's normally not that. I'm thinking of like people in my life, whether it was teachers, neighbors, like friends, parents that, maybe just spoke a couple of words or mentioned something that completely transformed my life. Like, for example, I'll give you one very random example, but I think about it often, is when I was in the 4th grade, I went to a private school. And this private school, it was a Montessori school. And I remember we had like a culture day, right? Because there were a lot of different backgrounds at the school. And for the first time in my life, I tried a fried plantain. I was just like, what is this? Oh my gosh. And it was amazing because one of my friends, her dad was from England and her mom was from Honduras. And so her mom brought in fried plantains. And I had never had a plantain before. And I was just like, this is amazing. Oh my God. And I think about that often. And I'm like, this woman probably is not thinking about the time that she brought in a fried green plantain into an elementary school. But I think about it as like the first time that I experienced another culture that to me was just so different. And that was just through food. So imagine the words that are spoken, the things that you share, how you help kids, neighbors, friends, whoever. You never know what that impact will do on their life and how it'll propel them forward. Now, I love green plantains, right? I love Spanish food. Like, we can get into all of that. But I just wanted to use that as an example of like, you just never know the impact. And you're not always going to see it.
It was something so insignificant probably to her.
So insignificant.
But here it is, 2 decades later, and you're still thinking about it.
2 decades. I am still thinking about the first time I had a fried green plantain.
Man, that is so powerful. That's powerful. Okay, I have one more thing I want to talk about before we end this episode.
Yes.
Preparation.
Yeah, that word. Oof. What about preparation?
Well, what role does preparation play when we are walking in our purpose?
So when it comes to preparation, I think it's really easy to get caught in I'm preparing for the next season. And I think, yes, 100%, you should be always preparing, always looking forward to what God has next for us. But I think sometimes we get lost in like, what am I preparing for in this season? Because I don't know what all this season is going to entail. We can get so caught in looking at the future that we forget to look right in front of us and to stay present and understand that God is still working in us and through us, even in like today's moment. And so I think when it comes to preparation, you have to look at it through that dual lens of, okay, what is God doing in my life right now? And then where is God taking me? And not focus so much on one versus the other. So I can't be so focused on today that I'm not thinking about tomorrow. But I also can't just be like, yeah, God, day by day, we'll get there. Like you have to at least be intentional. And then when it comes to preparation, I would say two things. It's one, God, what are you doing in me? So what is it that you are cleaning up, fixing, adjusting, right? Because we are all good, hot balls of messes. So how do you meet God where you're at and listen to, okay, I want you to pivot. I want you to do this. I want you to, maybe change the way that you say things or, befriend this person. What is God telling you right now? And then also always just think about, okay, what is that going to impact tomorrow? Because everything that he's asking you to do now, it's for a future state because he's always in the now, right? God is not bound by time. So he's not sitting here like, okay, I'm just going to give you this play by play. He's like, I know where I'm going to get you. I know where you're going to be. Follow me right now.
That's good. And I think one thing that we have said throughout all of our episodes, and we're going to end this episode with the same thought, is we got to get with God.
Yes. Yes.
Because, even in my own life, like we're so busy all the time doing something, one thing or another. And a lot of times when we don't have anything to do, we'll create something to do.
Yeah.
But if we're going to get the answers to these questions, if we're going to be prepared and have clarity about our purpose and our assignment in any given season of our lives, it's going to require us to stop and be intentional about seeking God and asking him these questions.
Yeah. I think too, you mentioned it earlier, you don't want to apply pressure and be like, hey, you need to figure it out now. Like, let's just jump into it. I think it's more about inviting God into the spaces and places that you haven't already invited him into. So if you haven't really thought about your job as an assignment, take a moment and ask God, like, hey, why am I here? Like, who am I here for? It could be one person, it could be 50 people, it could be the whole company, but invite God into that space. When it comes to your business or even schooling, like, hey, God, I really like this subject. I don't know why I like this subject. Like, help me better understand. Why is this interesting to me? Why does this excite me? Allow him to share more about who he created you to be. And in order to do that, you have to ask him. You have to invite him in. And so I would say, don't walk away from this episode thinking, oh my gosh, purpose is so big and I don't know what season I'm in and all these things. Like, just start by asking God, hey, help me understand where I'm at. Help me understand these things about myself that maybe I've always questioned. And just be open to what he says and shares with you.
One more thing I want to add. If you feel like you already know your purpose, you're not exempt from having to seek the Lord because, like Laura said, and it challenged me a little bit, is that we can't be so stuck on one thing that when God is asking us to shift or when he is asking us to pivot, we're not able to flow with him. So we have to constantly be seeking the Lord about what do you want me to do in this season of my life. So
exactly.
So hopefully that blessed you. Hopefully, you are encouraged that you're not just here for no reason. You're not just here to go to work and pay bills, but there is a greater purpose and a greater impact that God has placed you on this earth for.
Exactly. And definitely stay tuned for our next episode, which we are going to be tying everything together. So everything from episode 1 to even this episode and the next one, we are going to just be talking about, so what do you do now? And how do you actually do it?
Absolutely. So I'm excited. Thank you guys once again for joining us for this episode, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.